Hello and welcome to EcoElsa, where I, Elsa, create videos to help you and your kids get outdoors. On this week's video, we'll be talking all about poison ivy. What does it look like? Where does it grow? Why does it exist? How to prevent it? And how to treat it. That way, you and your kids don't accidentally end up doing this. More about poison ivy coming right up. As some of you may have guessed, that was not actually poison ivy I was rubbing all over my skin. Did I trick ya? Okay, well, it was leaves that look very similar to poison ivy called box elder, but they grow on a tree, which luckily for us in Minnesota and the Midwest, for the most part, if you're grabbing leaves off of a tree, you're not likely to be grabbing poison ivy. In other states, you're not that lucky, as poison ivy might be climbing trees. We're going to learn all kinds of new things today, but just keep in mind that any kind of plant, if you don't know what it is, or it might potentially be a plant that could harm you, you probably shouldn't be going and rubbing it on your skin. So don't copy that at home. But even look at this. It's crazy how similar they look. Now that we got that covered, let's talk about how I, as a person who works outdoors and spends a lot of time outdoors, have been poison ivy free for 8 years. And I'm going to share a lot of my tips and tricks with you, starting with how does poison ivy give you a rash? So how does poison ivy give us that itchy, burning, wonderful rash? Well, for starters, it's a chemical called Urushiol. And Urushiol is found in the plant poison ivy and on its skin. And it's this chemical in this oil that gets into the underlayer underneath your skin called the dermis, and that's where you get your wonderful allergic reaction from it. Your skin can take as little as 10 minutes to absorb Urushiol, and it can take your body up to a week to show symptoms of a poison ivy rash. Keeping this in mind though, it can take on average about 1 hour to 2 hours to absorb the poison ivy oils, and you are most likely going to show signs of a poison ivy rash within 24 to 48 hours of coming in contact with poison ivy. You can get a poison ivy rash through direct and indirect contact with the plant as well as through the air. So when it comes to direct contact, that kind of speaks for itself. It's accidentally touching the plant or rubbing it all over your body like I did, which you shouldn't do, right? We know better now, right? Getting a poison ivy rash through indirect contact is where we come into some of the fun, interesting things about poison ivy. Poison ivy oils can transfer the Urushiol onto an object that you then touch, and then you can get your poison ivy rash from touching that object. Urushiol can live on a surface for up to 5 years. This is why it's very important to make sure we're washing our outdoor gear regularly and making sure we're not setting our backpacks, I don't know, down in the middle of a patch of poison ivy. I've heard a lot of fun stories about how people have gotten poison ivy through indirect contact, one of which was a girl who had a dog and would run through the woods. The dog would get poison ivy on it, and the girl would go and rub the back of the dog with the bottom of her feet when sitting at the table, and she'd get poison ivy rashes on the bottom of her feet, of all places. Took her parents a little while to figure that one out. For my own personal, my mom has a theory for how I'd always get poison ivy on my forehead and my hairline, which poison ivy on the face is always going to be a horrible experience. So when I was a kid, I'd play a lot of soccer. And the soccer ball would roll off the field and into the woods. Someone would go pick it up. Maybe it rolled through some poison ivy oils, whatever. Fact is, you pick up the soccer ball, you do a throw-in, and then you do one of these. You push your hair back and the sweat, and all of a sudden you got poison ivy all over your forehead, which, not a fun experience, but my least favorite would probably be poison ivy on the eyelids and the throat. Hands down worst experience ever. Do not try it at home. You will not enjoy the results. And the last, most horrible way you can get poison ivy is through the air. Urushiol, like some chemicals, when burned, actually remains active and can be carried on the smoke. Which means if you burn poison ivy, whether on accident or on purpose, because you think you're being so clever and eradicating it from your forest, I have news for you. It might be carried on that smoke to you, and you might get it all over your skin because of the smoke, or even worse, you might breathe it in through your nose and your throat and get it on your lungs as well, which can become a very, very horrible experience, also possibly life-threatening and deadly depending on how allergic you or the people around you are to poison ivy. So let's make this very clear. You do not burn poison ivy. Nope, do not burn it. That is not what you want to do. That's the very last thing you ever want to do with poison ivy. Maybe. However, I do have some good news for you. About 15% of the population is in fact not allergic to poison ivy. Like one of my good friends, Kelsey. You lucky witch, you. In fact, Kelsey's the inspiration I got for my kind of little prank I pulled on you at the beginning of this video with rubbing the poison ivy over my skin, because Kelsey in fact does that with real poison ivy, like a crazy person. This is for you, Kelsey. Reminder. The reason why it's not a good reason to rub poison ivy or any plant all over your body is even if you're not allergic to it, you might over time develop an allergy for it because you keep coming in contact with it. Poison ivy is one of those weird allergies that as you grow up, your allergy to it might change with time. You might become more allergic, but you also may become less allergic. So here's hoping. Now that we've got clear how poison ivy rashes work and how do you get them, let's start talking about where you get them from. Please keep in mind that my descriptions today for poison ivy are mostly from my experiences working and living in the Midwest. It's how I've seen it when I've come across it outdoors, and I'll throw in tidbits about how it appears in other states as I have information for it. So for starters, poison ivy is a plant that tends to like part sun, part shade, which means a lot of times we find it along trails. Yay! Not really. Luckily though for us in the Midwest, for the most part poison ivy is a vine, but it's not a vine that you find climbing up trees very often. Which means for the most part poison ivy stays as a nice little ankle shin biter on the ground. Which means as long as you're not like putting your hands all over the ground or touching things that were on the ground, you shouldn't for the most part get poison ivy past your knees. Shouldn't, in theory. This is where the easy to identify stops. Poison ivy can be a very indiscriminate little plant. It's not very showy or obvious unless you're like focused on looking for it. Additionally, there's a lot of different subspecies of poison ivy that can appear a little bit different than others, but they all kind of look similar, like cousins almost. So poison ivy in the Midwest, I've seen it where it's very glossy, like how they describe in books, but I've also seen very dull poison ivy leaves before. It is a leaf of 3, but there's a lot of plants with leaves of 3, so keep that in mind. I've seen it where it has very symmetrical leaves, and it kind of looks almost more like a poison oak, which you also have an allergic reaction to. So kind of helpful there. But I've also seen poison ivy leaves that are not very symmetrical at all, and they're very just oddly shaped, and they look very similar to box elder leaves growing out of the ground. Why I used those for my prank earlier. The young leaves also tend to have a reddish tint to them, as well as maybe the stem. And in the fall, a lot of times the leaves turn red, and they have berries that can be a whitish, almost to a yellowish. So here, let me show you what I'm talking about. So here in my hand, I have a box elder leaf. This is off of a tree. This did not come off the ground. It's not poison ivy. Notice that the leaves are not all exactly the same. They're not exactly symmetrical. Kind of all come into a point though, and they have the little bit of the lobes coming off in points too. Now, handy dandy pointer stick. If you look at the poison ivy, notice that it kind of comes to a point too, and it kind of has some lobes a little bit on this one. This one has some more lobes, but they're not all exactly the same. Like they were cut out of a cookie cutter like oak leaves or maple leaves or something. They're all just kind of a little bit different. A lot of times the middle leaf is a lot bigger than the 2 side leaves as well. Now you can't quite see in this, but this one isn't quite that glossy. It's pretty dull looking. Additionally, notice how it's so low to the ground. It's maybe 4 or 5 inches off the ground. So this is fairly typical of a poison ivy found in Minnesota and in the Midwest. And it's kind of in a cluster and a bunch here. The good news is there's a helpful tip that will make it a little bit easier to spot poison ivy and to know when you need to keep an eye out for it. So besides when you're walking along trails, you got that nice open sun shade, keep an eye out for this plant called Virginia creeper. Virginia creeper and poison ivy are best friends forever. A lot of times they like growing in a lot of the same habitats, so I know when I see Virginia creeper to start keeping an eye out for poison ivy. This is what Virginia creeper looks like. Now next to it, we have its best friend, Virginia creeper. You're my best friend, you make me happy. And see, Virginia creeper, it has the 5 leaves that are diamond shaped. very jagged edges and come together in a point. Yep, and like I said, growing along the trail right next to each other because they're best buddies. They like the same habitat. And what's nice is, once again, they grow in similar locations, so if I see one, I know I need to start looking for the other. Now that we know how to identify what poison ivy looks like, let's make something clear. This video isn't to talk about how to eradicate poison ivy, because there's actually some big ecological benefits of having poison ivy. I'm sad to say. So let's get into why is there poison ivy and what is its purpose. For starters, poison ivy berries are an important food source for birds in the winter when food is scarce. For whatever reason, the berries aren't usually eaten in the fall, which means they provide a really great food source for birds in the winter. So if you really like a lot of different bird species, please keep in mind that having poison ivy benefits those birds, so you might not want to go around eradicating all poison ivy. Also, since poison ivy is a vine species and it has a very web-like root system, it helps with controlling erosion, which can be really important growing alongside trails, unfortunately, since a lot of trails get eroded from all of the foot traffic from people. You also should keep in mind that poison ivy evolved to have these oils over time to make it a less desirable food source for many herbivore species. So it's not really poison ivy's fault that we just happen to have an allergic reaction to it. Poor little poison ivy. It's not its fault. Don't hate it. And lastly, the most important, maybe one of the more important reasons for all of you for why we don't want to eradicate poison ivy is because Urushiol is a very complex chemical. We don't fully understand it yet. So it might turn out to be a chemical that solves a disease that we don't even know or understand yet. So we don't want to go out eradicating things that we don't know. So now that we understand poison ivy, where it grows, what it looks like, how it works, let's start getting into methods to prevent getting it, as well as treating it. Please keep in mind, though, that when it comes to treating poison ivy, that's something you should discuss with your doctor, as what works for me may not work for you. And I'm only sharing my own personal experiences with poison ivy in this video. I am not a doctor. I can't diagnose you over the computer and tell you how to treat it. You need to talk to your doctor and figure out what works best for you. Now that we got that covered, let's talk about how to prevent getting poison ivy so you don't have to even worry about treating it in the first place. So the very first thing to prevent getting poison ivy is stay on the trail. As we discussed earlier, poison ivy likes living on the edge of trails as they provide part sun, part shade habitat. So if you stay on the trail as much as possible, I know it's hard. I'm one of those people, I like to walk off the trail too, to go take a picture of a cool plant or something. But if you try and stay on the trail, you're less likely of coming in contact with poison ivy and less likely of getting it, which is great. Now, if you're listening to my first one, the next thing you can do to help prevent getting poison ivy is wear long pants. By wearing long pants, you help prevent the Urushiol and the oils from directly getting on your skin and absorbed through your skin. So by doing this, wearing long pants, you have a better chance of not getting it. However, as we talked about earlier, Urushiol can live up to 5 years on a surface. So when you're wearing long pants and you have gear outdoors, make sure it's getting washed regularly. That way you aren't getting poison ivy through indirect contact from the stuff that came into contact with poison ivy. If you realize that you've come into contact with poison ivy and it's touched your skin, try and rinse it off as soon as possible. Even if you just have a water bottle with you and no soap, try and rinse it a little bit of it off, or as much of it off as you feel is necessary. One of the ways this past fall I'm pretty sure I avoided having poison ivy on my face again for the 100th time is I was playing a game called Instincts for Survival, and I realized I dove through a poison ivy bush onto the ground. And so I immediately took a time out, I went back to where the first aid kit was, and I washed and rinsed my face off a ton, and luckily enough I didn't end up getting poison ivy on my face. So must have gone right somewhere, but it's also because I immediately washed it off. I didn't wait 10 minutes and then go, okay, I guess I'll wash it off now. And the last thing you can do to help prevent getting poison ivy is to make sure you take a shower each night before bed when you've been out indoors that day. This is because you might not have absorbed the oils yet. You don't know for sure, but taking a shower will help be a good preventative thing to double check and make sure. As well as you might have had it on some of your clothes and then gotten it on you, and if you go to bed with it, now you're going to absorb it. So try and take a shower regularly each night. Will also help wash off a lot of other things like bug spray and sunscreen, which might also be irritating your skin. And now for our very last topic, treating poison ivy. Once again, please keep in mind that I am not a doctor. I am not here to diagnose you or treat you, and you should always consult your own doctor. I'm only sharing my own personal experience and what the system I worked out with my doctor for how to treat myself, so that maybe you can talk to your doctor about it and see if it'll work for you. First, oatmeal baths. In the past, oatmeal baths have worked for me with soothing the poison ivy rash as well as treating it and helping dry it out. I found that over time, avoiding sunlight and sweat and heat helps your poison ivy rash be more manageable. That being out in the sunlight and the heat and being all sweaty actually aggravates the rash even worse and makes it an even less fun experience, if that's even possible. So I found over time that avoiding the heat and staying cool help with making the poison ivy more manageable, so I'm not that itchy and it heals quicker. Win-win. And now for my super secret way of treating poison ivy that I worked out with my doctor that works best for me and you should consult your doctor about. Now, in the past when I got poison ivy, it was so bad for the most part that Benadryl by itself would not work, and I knew I needed to go into the doctor because I needed steroids to get it to go away. So about 8-ish, 9-ish years ago, I talked with my doctor and figured out a system that would work best for me so that I would not have to go in 3 times a summer for steroids for poison ivy. So in addition to being better about preventing getting poison ivy, this is what we worked out. So what was happening is Benadryl by itself was not doing enough for me. So at this time I was getting really into medicinal plants, and I discovered a plant called jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not. And I talked with my doctor about using it, and it turns out, ta-da, it was the secret bullet that I needed to help get my poison ivy allergy under control. It worked best for me. Jewelweed is a native plant to Minnesota that was actually used by Native Americans to treat things like poison ivy rash, bug bites, and sunburn, just to name a few. It's a very great little plant, and I make sure to harvest it off of private property. I'm not going and I'm taking it from the woods or from a public place because you're not supposed to do that. Additionally, this way I can make sure there haven't been any herbicides or pesticides put on my jewelweed. So now that I've talked with my doctor, this is what I do now. When I discover that I have a rash that is most likely poison ivy, I take Benadryl, either the pill form or the stuff that you apply onto your skin, and I put jewelweed stem onto the rash itself. This is because the combination of the Benadryl helping prevent some of the itch, helping try and heal it, and the jewelweed a little bit more with the focusing on healing the rash and soothing it, is a great combination that helps my body get the rash under control and help dry it out, as long as I don't itch it. That's the key. I also know now that if the jewelweed Benadryl combination isn't working, that's the strongest that I can do for myself, and it's time to go to the doctor. This has drastically cut down the number of poison ivy rashes that I've had to go into the doctor for. In fact, I think there was only ever once time in the last 8 years, and I think it might have honestly actually been at the 8-year mark, which was part of the reason why I got better about the preventing system and the treating system. So since I've worked out this system, I've worked outdoors and been outdoors a lot of the time, and I've only had a few cases of mild rashes on my ankles, which most likely were due to me wearing my same outdoor pants more often than I should have, and getting a poison ivy rash through indirect contact. I don't know for sure if they were poison ivy rashes, but I do know that the Benadryl jewelweed combination helped to dry out those rashes quickly and soothingly, so it wasn't a horrible experience like it had been in the past when I got rashes from being outdoors. Once again, this is the system that worked best for me. Please consult your doctor before trying it out for yourself. I don't want you to injure yourself further and have a horrible, even more horrible experience for poison ivy, because jewelweed is not the plant for you. I hope you found this video useful and that the information I gave you today will help make the outdoors more accessible for you and your kids so that you're not afraid of poison ivy being everywhere when you go outdoors, and you're empowered and ready to go outdoors and have fun. And unfortunately, that is all I have for you for today. So if you really liked this video, please consider subscribing. Click the little subscribe button below and make sure to ring that bell. That way you can be notified the second my videos go up on YouTube. But as always, I post new videos on Wednesdays. If you're looking for more resources to help you and your kids get outdoors, check out my blog and my other social media accounts. Links in the description, but I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. Just search EcoElsa. If you have stuff you'd like to share about poison ivy or more questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll get back to you. I'd love to talk to you and hear from you. As well as please let me know if there's a topic you'd like me to cover in future videos. I'd love to get some suggestions from all of you out there. As always, I hope you all have a fantastic week. You be safe, learn lots, have fun, and get your kids outdoors. Bye!